Hello, this is Debbie McAllister, and this is Light Up Your Worth. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. Anne-Laure is a trauma-sensitive yoga therapist who specializes in mental, behavior, and emotional health. It actually has an abbreviation of C-IAYT. She supports individuals in navigating anxiety, depression, burnout, and trauma recovery through the lens of yoga therapy. She works with hospitals, mental health, and behavioral health facilities, as well as addiction recovery treatment facilities who are ready to bring a holistic approach to mental health to their staff and patients. Her work is based on the understanding that emotions, thoughts, and patterns of behavior live in the body, and that's what often guides our decisions. She uses movement, breath, and other somatic practices to help people reconnect with themselves and navigate life from a centered and empowered place. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
I am super excited to dig into what is a trauma sensitive yoga therapist today, as well as I know there's so much burnout and anxiety over the last couple of years. And so I really wanted to take some time to explore all of those since we have your expertise with us, Anne. So I wanted to start us off and find out and have you explain to us what is a trauma sensitive yoga therapist?
Mhm. Yeah, so I'll start with talking a little bit about yoga therapy and then talk about the trauma sensitive aspects. So yoga therapy is a way to work typically one-on-one with people or in like small groups that have a similar therapeutic goal. And what's more specific about yoga therapy versus like going to a yoga class is that it really is a way to use all the different tools of yoga to address our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual needs. So it's really looking at the whole person rather than like isolating the different symptoms that someone might show up with, and move towards that with the understanding that all of these things are connected, and our experiences affect all of the different layers of who we are. So that's a little bit about yoga therapy. I personally, like you said, specialize in mental health and emotional health wellness. Sorry. And so that's where I bring in the trauma sensitive aspects. So trauma sensitive yoga is a more specific yoga practice that uses, I guess, different principles as a way to start reversing patterns of trauma. So often when there is trauma, there is a lack of choice, a lack of power. And so trauma-sensitive yoga is a way to empower individuals again so that they can reclaim their agency, come back to a sense of choice, and be able to create a sense of safety within themselves. So that's a lot of like how I work one-on-one with people. That's often what we start with, is to really create that sense of safety in the body as well as in the mind to start, I guess, the healing process.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, safety in our own bodies. Oh, that's a big
Yes.
I know for a lot of us, that's a big deal, feeling safe in our own bodies. N-
Yeah.
How does that show up in your practice with
Mhm.
with people are coming through you? Like, what does that look like for people if maybe they're like, well, they don't know if they're not safe, I guess,
Right.
right? The
Yes.
opposite of it. What
Yeah, I mean, that does show up a lot, and often it is hard for people to define what it means for them to feel safe in their body. And so from that trauma sensitive yoga perspective, it's this idea that we can be aware of our bodies, be in the present moment. So often with trauma, we either kind of like stuck in the past, or there's like a bit of a fear of what might happen in the future. So to be in the present moment is difficult for a lot of us, to be honest. And I think especially when there is a background of trauma or a history of trauma there. And so to be able to have awareness of what's going on in our bodies and be able to be there without trying to move away from it, without trying to distract ourselves, is one element of what it can mean to feel safe in our bodies. Like, you know, we can experience different sensations in our bodies and know that, like, right here and right now, we're okay. And that again comes back to being in the present moment and feeling safe in the present moment. So I think those two things are quite connected.
Yeah, being in the present
Mm-hmm.
and not distraction, to actually have that awareness of
Mm,
what that feels like. I'm like thinking to myself, how would that feel for myself, right? If I applied that, what
mm,
you just shared, to myself. And um, I know there's times when I've practiced like hot yoga and yin yoga have
mhm,
been my things. Oh, I should say
mhm,
post COVID. I did,
mhm.
it's been about 4 years now. I mean, a little
Yeah.
before COVID. And
Mhm,
when I think about what you're saying about being present in your body, it's actually why I had to go to hot yoga, because I
mm,
had a hard time like staying present.
mhm,
So how does like I want to say the technique, but is there
mhm,
certain poses that are easier for people to understand, like to be able to see if they're present, or does it
mm,
help with like the monkey mind of the
mhm.
practice?
Yeah, so I don't think there are specific poses. There are, of course, certain yoga postures that are going to be more accessible to more people in general. So I typically start there. But it's more about how we approach them. So one of the principles of trauma sensitive yoga is that we, kind of invite people to connect to their bodies in small ways. So it's, kind of like, well, what if I lift my arm over here? Can I feel the muscle in my shoulder? Can I feel my arm over my head? Without looking at my hands, can I tell that my hand is over my head? So it comes back to like very more like practical, simple ways. It's not necessarily easy, um, because I think a lot of us are very disconnected from our bodies. And so I think starting with things that are very tangible. Another practice that I like to share is like have people rub their hands together and just noticing what that feels like. And noticing, like, the maybe like warmth between the palms, noticing the sensations in the hands. And that's a very, I guess, tangible and simple way to start like bringing that awareness back to the body. We have a lot of nerve endings in our hands, and so it might be maybe an easier place to start than like trying to, connect with like our back or what's going on in our legs or things like that. So bringing it back to like more tangible things is a good place to start.
Wow, that's a really powerful way to start. Just even,
Mm.
as you were saying that, I started to rub my hands too. And I was like, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
you start noticing all of the small things about your hands that
Right.
hadn't
Yeah.
even really thought about today. Like they're
Mhm.
kind of wanting to be stretched. I was doing a lot of typing
Mm.
earlier today. So,
Right.
you know, oh,
Yeah.
well,
And
go ahead.
oh, I was going to say like another aspect of that is also to bring a lot of curiosity along with that, because sometimes when we start to connect with sensations in our bodies, it can feel a little bit challenging in some ways, or we might, kind of have our minds come online and have some judgments about like this and that. And so along with that inquiry, bringing that sense of curiosity as well.
Yeah, curiosity is the foundation, I
Mm.
think, along with gratitude of
Mm.
a well lived
Yeah.
growing life, right? Of continually learning and
Absolutely.
being curious about different things. So I love how you're able to incorporate that even into like different parts of your body. Is that
Mhm.
how you would be
Mhm.
curious?
Yeah, absolutely. Like curious about sensations, for example, like, to tie it back to the mental health aspect and the emotions that we feel. I think we experience our emotions as sensations in our bodies. And sometimes those sensations can feel very overwhelming or just overpowering at times. And so to be able to have curiosity around, like, oh, like when I feel anxious, I feel like this tightening in my chest or whatever it might be for you. And so to be able to bring that curiosity, as we look at this sensation, can be really powerful as well to um, reframe it instead of just trying to push it away or get rid of it. It's more like, oh, it's interesting that I feel this way. Like, what is going on in that part of my body? Like, what does that feel like? What does that look like? Is there like something that needs to be expressed or things like that?
Oh, I like that. So if I start feeling something in my body and trying to sometimes identify what you're feeling is actually
Mm,
really it's
mhm.
not as easy as it sounds. At least
No,
I
it's
haven't
not.
in my on
Yeah.
all in my experience. So like when
Hmm.
for myself, I do can feel it here, a tightness in my chest, but
Hmm.
I really feel it more in like my nerves feel like they're in my stomach. They
Mm.
start like going crazy, right? Like,
Right.
and
Yeah.
if I'm driving, like I feel all of a sudden like I got a death grip on my steering wheel and
Mm.
I get hot. I get like a
Hmm.
heat coming through, and then I try to figure out, well,
Right.
what is this feeling?
Right.
So
Yeah.
is that what you're talking about with the
Hmm.
awareness of,
Yeah.
and then stepping into whatever?
Hmm. Yeah, so getting curious about, like, oh, first question, like, what is this that I'm feeling? Like, where do I feel this in my body? Is it staying in one place, or is it moving around as I keep observing it? And sometimes it's helpful to keep the focus on those sensations. And I will also say that sometimes it's not, like, especially like if you're driving, for example, maybe it's not the best time to like try to inquire about what's going on in the body. And at that point, it might be just more helpful to find a way to um, shift our focus to something else so that we can continue whatever we're doing. So it's also about like discerning, when is it helpful and safe for me to actually keep focusing on this, and when is it more helpful for me to just go do something else and maybe like, start cooking food or listening to music or watch a TV show or whatever it might be. um, so I think that piece is very important too, because sometimes some of those sensations can feel quite overpowering. And for us to just um, keep our focus on it and kind of like go deeper into them may or may not be helpful. So that's, I guess, for each of us to discern when that's helpful or not. And it's definitely something that I work with when I work with clients, is to, create that space where it might be a little safer if I'm there with them to actually start exploring some of the sensations that feel more difficult or more challenging to be with.
Hmm. Well, that sounds really supportive in
Mm,
that type of environment where you can feel safe in your body
mm,
to be able to, you know that that's a time to start unraveling some of that and
mhm,
release it. What
mhm,
what I don't know if you've experienced this, but I'm curious to hear your opinion on it. Is that
mhm,
I've been in in lots of yoga classes.
mhm,
And sometimes you walk into a yoga class and you're doing a pose and you start crying.
mm,
And I've seen it around me, over the years on the mat where I think even Glenna Doyle talks about when
mm,
in one of her books, her earlier books, about she would go
mm,
to her mat and just fall apart while she was doing yoga. Have
Mhm.
have you
Yeah.
experienced that with, having it be more trauma focused and mental health focused?
Yeah, I think it can happen for sure. I mean, like you shared in my introduction, I think a lot of those emotions, those ways that we show up in the world are very embedded in our bodies. And so I think sometimes, like, yeah, moving in a certain way or opening up a certain part of our body can be um, kind of opening the door to release some of those emotions that we may not have explored or looked at in a long time. And sometimes, yeah, that can show up in ways that are very unexpected. And I think, some yoga spaces are safer than others, for sure. But there's also something to be said about, like, if we are in a space that we feel safe in, then we might, experience that, I guess, emotional release. And I think, for yoga teachers to create a space that is safe for people to be, and to express those sometimes strong emotions is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it really is dependent upon an instructor. It's amazing how
Mhm.
every instructor, as like yourself, has a whole different vibe to you, and
Mhm.
just how you walk in and how you hold the space and allow
Mhm.
that. Is there um is there any experiences that you've had that you could share without, being able to identify any of your the people that you worked with, of
Mhm.
about how you've seen how remarkable that this has been part of their healing journey,
Mhm.
doing this type of trauma sensitive yoga?
Mhm. Yeah. I think one of the ways that I see, like, one of the shifts, I guess, that I see with the people I work with starts with the awareness, and cultivating that sense of awareness for how they show up in certain situations. And I think that, like, I guess connecting the dots between, like, oh, this is, how I show up in this situation, and that might be related to, other experiences that I've had in the past. And I think yoga really helps us to slow down enough so that we can have that awareness, and that alongside cultivating, like, safety in different ways. Because I think, one thing that is very, I think, important in the work that I do is that I will give each person a small practice, like a short practice, to take home with them. And so I really think, like, a lot of the benefits come from them practicing that on their own. And there is a strong, like, sense of empowerment and agency that comes from that, I think, because then they have, different tools that they can reach for to be able to support themselves. And so um I don't know, I think, just to share a more, like, specific example, someone I've been working with who, I guess, had some, like, was struggling to, like, self-regulate when those, strong emotions were coming up. And after working together for a few months, she kind of shared that, like, she had that experience that she was quite familiar with, of, like, a strong emotion coming up, and she was able to have the awareness, like, maybe more early on of what was going on, and, like, maybe more subtle ways that her body was telling her, like, okay, something's going on here. And then she was able to, reach for some of the tools that we worked on together to be able to, like, regulate herself back to a more neutral, more centered place.
Oh, that's interesting. So
Mm.
does does this work bring in stuff like ants? Like, I know that's a tool that therapists use too.
Mhm.
Automatic
Um,
negative thoughts, right? I
oh,
think
I'm
is what it stands for.
not familiar with that one, but there's
Okay.
definitely a lot of overlap between, like, the yoga philosophy approach to like CBT, like cognitive behavioral therapy, or DBT as well. So there's definitely like a lot of things that you can see the parallels and like how it overlaps. So it might be a similar thing. So yeah, yoga philosophy talks about like having that awareness of the thoughts, again, like being able to observe what's going on without like reacting, but more creating a bit of space around what is going on, what's coming out from the outside, and the way that we respond to it. So the more that we have space, the more that we can make a different choice if we want to, as to like how we respond to things.
Yeah, that's interesting. I worked in my career, I've worked in a psych hospital,
Mm-hmm.
and it was for youth, and
Mm.
they actually specialized in DBT therapy. It
Yeah.
was one of
Yeah.
their therapists, and
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't here where I am currently, but in another state. And so when I lived in Nevada, it was part of a high specialty with DBT, and
Mm-hmm.
it was primarily girls
Mm.
who were using the DBT versus the
Mm.
male population in
Oh,
the youth.
that's
So
interesting.
I
Yeah.
thought that was really quite interesting. And they did have
Mm.
yoga come in a
Mm.
couple days a week and to be able to do it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
at firsthand, I've seen the power of the yoga, and they all had trauma.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you're in as an adolescent, by the time
Yeah.
you're at an on-site,
Mm.
unfortunately locked facility, you've had a
Mm-hmm.
lot of trauma. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
so it was powerful. That's why I got so excited when we connect, because
Mm.
I
Mm-hmm.
spent some time in that environment, and it was really powerful. So
Mm. Yeah.
I wanted to kind of move us into talking about how we brought out anxiety and burnout,
Mm.
and how you're
Mm-hmm.
working with people with, I know, with the last couple of years, and I work in healthcare during the
Mm-hmm.
day, and I've seen an enormous amount, no matter where I've been over the last 6 years. I've been in numerous healthcare facilities, the mental health
Mm.
facility, and I've just have seen burnout at a level that you can't
Mm.
even explain to somebody, or I think it's anybody who is part of the essential, who they labeled essential. Of course, I think we're all
Right.
essential. So I really just do not care for that word,
Yeah.
um, that we were all essential, whether you were clinical or non-clinical. And
Mm.
so I wanted to have you share what you're seeing with,
Mm-hmm.
the burnout, and if somebody's, what does that look like? Like, how do you know you have it versus
Mm-hmm.
being something else, right? So wanted to see
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind sharing about that, Anne.
Yeah, of course. So I I've been working with some healthcare facilities and with the individuals who work in healthcare facilities one-on-one in the last few months, with that focus on burnout. And I shared like a talk recently around that topic. And I think what's interesting is to look at the way that we define burnout, I guess, from like the Western model perspective. I think there is a strong emphasis on hard work, pushing through things, working long hours, being able to do everything. And that often doesn't really acknowledge like people's capacity and how different that might be from one person to the next. It doesn't really acknowledge for like diversity, and then it often like focuses on kind of separating the different aspects of our health. So the Western model typically like treats the body with the body and the mind with the mind, although that is definitely changing and evolving. Like you were sharing about this place that you worked at in Nevada that was bringing in yoga, for example. And so the yoga perspective on burnout is that it really impacts all of the layers, I guess we can call them, of who we are, and that they're all kind of interwoven and interconnected. And so from that yoga perspective, we can look at like each of those layers and how that might show up for different people. So, I guess the one that is very obvious is like that sense of exhaustion and depletion, and maybe some like aches and pains showing up, fatigue, sleep issues. But then if we look at like all the other layers, we can look at like our emotional, mental, as well as like our sense of purpose, for example, our beliefs. So all of these different things can also point, to burnout in different ways. So just to give you a few examples, like, losing like that desire to engage in our work, the sense of satisfaction that we get from our work, the level of compassion that we're able to put out and give to other people. And there's also often like, I guess, that loss of purpose and feeling disconnected from like, why we decided to pursue a certain career, for example. So there's lots of different ways I think that it can show up that are sometimes like not addressed or looked at as burnout in some ways. And I think one of the reasons why yoga can be really supportive is because yoga does look at like all of these different layers of who we are, right? And it really can offer different practices that address or reach those different parts of ourselves.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love how you walked us through how it can look different for us. What
Mhm.
I've seen, and it really fits along what you just described, is that people who entered healthcare
Mm.
really wanted to make a difference.
Yeah.
And when you start seeing where they're not as compassionate,
Mm.
like they've lost some of that compassionate, or
Mhm.
um, they just seem like they've lost their reason of why they
Mm.
wanted to do it in the first place. Like that it's like a really
Yeah.
big disconnect of,
Mhm.
like now it's all of a sudden a job versus,
Mm.
they felt so aligned to be able to want to help
Mhm.
people and be of service. And
Yeah.
and I love that this is a way to be able to really help people to help themselves.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
um how oh so I was thinking about, how do you make that reconnection there to
Mm.
help somebody back to themselves?
Mhm. Yeah, I think um, that can be a tricky question to answer, especially because it will be different for each person, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so each person will have like their own ways of finding their way back. And I think it's also a tricky balance to find because um, in the way that we look at burnout in our society, it often points to the individual as the person who needs to quote unquote fix it.
Mhm.
And I think there is something to be said about like, the place, like our workplaces and our work environment, and to put it all on the individual to, figure it out can also be like very unvalidating in a way. So just to come back to your question, it's I think it's going to be first about like really um, restoring the vitality and the energy. Often, when someone is burnt out, there is definitely that deep sense of exhaustion and I think often starting there and finding ways that the person can come back to their vitality and a sense of feeling, I guess, a little more energized in general without, bringing work into it is often going to be the first step, I would say, like from my experience. But then, I think it's really about, again, like going in and finding like the things that bring you joy, the things that bring like even like a very small sense of connection with something bigger than us, or a sense of connection with other people in the community. So I mean, there's a lot of parts to this, and I think there's a lot of different ways that people find that sense of connection, but often like nature or music or you know stories can be different ways to approach that, I think.
Mhm. I love that. You to be able to go from burnout to vitality, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Vitality,
Vitality,
yeah,
yeah. It's,
yeah.
that's interesting. So when you're working with a client, are you always in person or are you like setting it up where you're doing it like remote? I know so much work these days is done remotely. So I'm
Mhm.
just curious
Yeah,
how does that work?
yeah, I offer both ways. I work with quite a few people locally in person, but the remote option is always there as well, either for people who are local or for people who are, in a different city or state.
Mhm.
Um, and so like the way that a session goes is that there's often, well, it usually starts with a lot of like conversation and kind of figuring out like what is happening for the whole person. So coming back to, looking at the whole person and their whole situation, not separating the different aspects of health and the different aspects of life, because I think it really is all connected and it all impacts each other. And then after that, we do a few different practices together. So, it can be movement, it can be breathing. I think the breath is very helpful for burnout in particular, but for a lot of things in general too. Because in yoga, I guess the breath is connected to that sense of vitality and energy as well. So just a side note there, sorry. And so then we try different practices. So breath, movement, it can be some relaxation techniques. It can be like some like looking at different aspects of yoga philosophy. Sometimes I share with them like some readings to do or writing, or there's just a lot of different tools, I guess, that yoga offers.
Yeah, that's as you were mentioning that, I thought to myself, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if in a lot of the healthcare organizations that I've been in, well, actually all of them, they've had resources to like these health programs
Mm-hmm.
where like a health coach and they go
Mm-hmm.
through and you're on the phone. But wouldn't it be fabulous if the organization also offered these type of services?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's something I would love to do more of for sure, is to work with some of this organization to bring that to staff, because I really think that to provide the best care for patients, the staff needs to be also taking care of themselves. Um and I think for that to part of that is of course each individual um finding ways to take care of themselves, but I really also think that organizations need to take care of their people. So
Yeah, because you touched on that too, right? Where we
mm,
might think of it as like um one person, that they in
mm,
the Western world to go fix themselves. But I don't think there's a healthcare organization out there who can't say when they're looking at their people, the
mm,
top 5 reasons people are leaving. I mean, across, right? The great resignation, but it really isn't that people aren't working. They're just realigning themselves
Mm.
to something that they feel like brings them more purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, super powerful way to be able to incorporate that into a health program.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you also
Yeah.
touched on breath work,
Yeah.
and I know, so from your perspective, how would you define breath work, right? Like, just so that everybody can see how that incorporates into what you're doing. So, how would you describe breath
Mhm.
work?
So I'm just going to clarify like what, so breath work I think is a little bit different than what I offer. So I work with the breath from the yoga perspective, which I think is a little bit different from breath work technique, which I'm not super familiar with. But the way that I work with the breath is really considering that the breath is very connected to our nervous system. And if you think of like the breath in and the breath out, I often, like to give this image, I guess, to people is that like, the inhale is we're bringing in energy, we're bringing in oxygen to really like nourish our body. And so that's kind of like the up, like the stimulation in a way. And then the activation of our nervous system as well. And the exhale is more connected with like, that settling, that sense of relaxation. And it's connected with the relaxation response we think about our nervous system. And so I think that's really powerful especially when working with mental health and trauma, because often what's showing up is that the nervous system is often dysregulated, and people are having a hard time like coming back to that more like neutral place. And so working with the breath is a way to access the nervous system in a very direct way. And so, for example, when there is a lot of anxiety present, that's like overactivation in a way, which is very like up here,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense. And so bringing in a focus on breathing out is what can, kind of like regulate the nervous system and come back to neutral. And to look at the other side of that, if we look at someone who's experiencing depression, it's kind of the other side, which is more like low energy. And so bringing in more of a focus on the inhale is what's going to bring us back up and like find that lifting. So I hope that makes sense. So I think that's where like the breath can be really helpful in helping people to self-regulate.
Okay. It does make sense. So, just to put it in my own words, then, right? So, if
Mhm.
I'm doing, like, say, I'm going to go do a pose, I was
Mhm.
just trying to think of something that I would do it with, even if I'm just standing up, right?
Mhm.
Like, is that when you mean like where you take when you go to get in your pose, you might take the deep breath in, and then
Mhm.
as you start to relax, you
Mhm.
outhale your breath, and you
Mhm.
can literally, I can anyway, at least feel my
Yeah.
body like tense by the time I do it like 3 times or 4 times.
Mhm. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
deep cleansing breath of what you're saying,
Mhm.
you're like
Yeah.
releasing and then
Mhm.
pulling back in
Yeah,
the energy.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah. Mhm. And so we can, work with the breath on its own, or we can work with breath and movement together, which might, have more of that effect as well. So if you think of like, if you're standing up, for example, and like you're raising your arms up as you breathe in. So like the fact that you're reaching up is also kind of that like lifting, I guess, with the breath. And then if you fold forward and like bring your hands down like towards the floor, for example, with that exhale, like the movement is going with the breath, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so we can use the movement as a way to like amplify, I guess, the effect of the breath as well.
That's beautiful. I
Mhm.
think everybody could try that at home, don't you think? I mean, it's safe
Yeah,
for anybody to
absolutely.
just even practice that standing up. I know on YouTube they'll be able to see us, but just, the raising of the hands and
Yeah.
moving forward.
hmm
I think it's child's pose when you come down and you're kind of on the floor. Is that child's pose? Gosh,
Yeah, I mean,
getting
you could
uh-huh.
even do it like without going all the way to the floor, like maybe just bringing your hands down to your knees or something like that, for
Mm-hmm.
example. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that would still be like that downward movement.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Mm.
I like that. I think that's a really good tip for people to start
Mm.
thinking about, that breath can help you connect in,
Mhm.
bring
Yeah.
awareness to what you're doing. And so that's really powerful. So, and how can people reach out? I also wanted to find out, do you have any type of one-on-one program that you're doing with people now? If they're starting to resonate, they're like, oh, I could really use some awareness, and I have
Mhm.
trauma, and they're mixing up different types of therapies. And
Mhm. Yeah, I think what I offer, so I work pretty much only one-on-one. I do offer some local yoga classes as well, but well, actually, no, they are both in person and online, so I could share some of that too. Um, but for one-on-one work, if you are someone who um, is experiencing anxiety, depression, burnout, or you're working through your own like trauma recovery, um, I think that's the people I work with. And so um, we can do either in person in Flagstaff, Arizona, or I also offer online sessions. So if you want to find out more, you can head over to my website, which is yogawithanne-laure.com. Um, and I have all the information on there. You can reach out through my website. It's probably the best way to do that. Email, or I've got my maybe I have my phone number on there. I'm not 100% sure. Um, but email is probably the best way to reach out. And yeah, I'm happy to chat before you book a session to make sure it's a good fit, and to make sure I can support you with what you're going through. And I think bringing the body into mental health care is, I believe it's way to really look at it holistically, because I don't think we can really think our way through anything. And often, our minds, we like to intellectualize things and put things into logical terms. And a lot of those mental health issues that we are experiencing are just don't necessarily feel logical in a lot of ways, right? And so I think, reconnecting with our bodies and how our bodies are experiencing those things is a very important way to move forward with that healing.
Yeah, I completely agree. We can try to
Mm,
logic ourselves out of feeling something or being stuck
yeah.
in our body. And I think anybody who's ever had a rough day and just took a walk can
Yeah,
connect that
right.
somatic
Yeah,
practice with how they're
exactly.
feeling. Or you're having a tough day at wherever you're working, and you just walk around the block even, or
Yeah, right.
that
And that just
movement.
brings you right into your body instead of overthinking things, which we all very good at doing, I think.
Yeah, right. We are. Well, this is so wonderful. And did you share your social too, where people
Oh,
could
no, I
connect with you
didn't. So
at?
I'm mostly active on Instagram and LinkedIn. So on Instagram, you can find me at Yoga Therapy Flagstaff. And if you look up my name on LinkedIn, that's where you can find me as well.
Wonderful. And everybody knows I just moved to Flagstaff.
Mhm.
So I think I've been here 9 weeks when this is being recorded. And so it'll be out, won't be
Mhm.
out, tomorrow or anything, but it's so wonderful that you are here
Mhm.
in this new beautiful place that I'm living at, and
No.
just another place to have community. So
Mhm.
thank
Yeah.
you, Anne, for joining me
Mhm.
and sharing your knowledge. And I hope that um, people who are listening or people who work in a function, even at an
Mhm.
organization, that wouldn't that be great to have a pilot program of people like
Mm.
high achievers who are struggling, to be
Mhm.
able to bring that in and be able to experience that. It would be
Yeah,
really phenomenal.
absolutely. And that actually reminds me of something else I wanted to add. I also offer like speaking or like training facilitation for organizations who want to bring that more, I guess, holistic way to look after their employees and their staff. So if that is something that your organization is interested in, that's another way that we can work together.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Anne, for being here and sharing so much of your wisdom. You're very phenomenal. And don't we need more help in mental
Yeah.
health? So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.